Now it must be a couple of years ago, I made a video asking if anybody remembered this housing estate as an army camp, and funnily enough, some people did. This is the housing estate I'm going to talk about, and the road that runs through it is called Camp Road. I'm going to guess it's called Camp Road after the army camp rather than Camp Hill, otherwise it would be called Camp Hill Road. Now, this housing estate was built, as far as I can remember, either in the late 1970s or the early to mid 1980s. And prior to that, if you lived on this estate here, this would have been your quickest way to get to Woolton Wood or Camp Hill. You would basically cross Speke Road and walk up a pathway which led to an opening in the sandstone wall on School Lane, and the entrance to Woolton Wood was pretty much opposite. Now, when the housing estate was built, it altered the lay of the land because you can no longer do that. It's a dead end. Now, the original video was put onto YouTube on the 30th of May 2023, so it's almost 2 years ago. And on that video there was a few comments. No one actually remembered it until Tony Onslow came along, and he said that when he was a lad it was the home of the 59th Anti-Aircraft Brigade. So I did a little bit of research, and to be honest, there's not a great deal on the internet about them. But the brigade, the 59th Anti-Aircraft Brigade, were part of the Territorial Army, and this was their home, and they were here from the early stages of World War II up until, I'm going to say, the late 1970s. When I was at Kingsthorne, it would have been around about 1967 that a lad joined our class, and his dad was in the army. He was a staff sergeant in the army, and he was leaving, so they'd come home from Germany and they were staying on this army camp while his dad was purchasing a house which was in Penny Lane. So it was active then, but not many people actually on the camp. Probably people in the same position, people who were leaving the army and needed somewhere to stay in the interim. Rightio, so let's have a look at the housing estate as it is now and talk about what was there in the past. Stood at the top of Charterhouse Road, and across Speke Road there is Camp Road, and that would have been the route to take to get to Woolton Wood. Until, of course, this housing estate was built. Now, back then it wasn't Camp Road, it was just a track, I think. Now, on this side of the camp, this was just rubble. This side, I think there was a couple of large prefab buildings, possibly from where this camp was run from. Coming up to what was then the ATC Air Training Corps wooden hut. These days they are still here, but this is a new building that they have, this time made of bricks, and a steel fence around it to keep unwanted visitors out. Now, this on the right here where the houses are, I think was just wasteland, just grass and bushes. As we walk further up, this would have been your way out. Now where the flats are, just in the corner there was an old house, and I did ask if anybody knew what the house was. And further along Speak Road we come to Jude Wine Close. Now according to records, some of the houses in Jude Wine were built in the 1950s, some were built in the 1960s, and some are a lot more recent. In fact, there's one at the top being built now. So I think these were here. On the right hand side then of Jude Wine would have been the backs of a row of white prefab houses. Now I had an email from somebody who said that they were made of wood. That's possible. But they divide between the ATC hut and the prefab houses of the camp. The middle part of it was just a wasteland. So we're coming to the top now, and we can't, well, it gets a bit noisy now because there's a house being built at the top and a dog going nuts. So we'll reconvene on School Lane. This is School Lane, and the entrance to Woolton Wood is behind me, the sandstone walls of the boundary of the park. So we're walking now along School Lane, and we're going to take a left turning which will take us to the top of Jude Wine Close, where we were before we took this little break. Now the housing estate that is here now is reasonably new. I'm going to say 1980s, but this was once part of the camp, and I don't remember being able to get out at the top of Jude Wine Close. You used to have to use the path that is now Camp Road, which is now a dead end. So this housing estate sits on part of the camp that was just basically grassland and bushes, I think. The camp came to an end just before all this began, so at the top of Jude Wine Close this was just grassland, I think. So if we walk down this alleyway we will pass the new house that is being built at the top of Jude Wine, and it looks quite substantial. That's taking up quite a bit of room. It's going to be quite nice if it's just one. Now this I mentioned earlier, when we got to the top of Camp Road I said there was an old house at the top right. Well, this is the area that house sat in, and now I think this is a retirement home type complex, but this used to be where a Victorian derelict house was. So if you know anything about that, I would really like to hear from you. So looking at the camp from Speak Road, looking towards Woolton Wood, the road that is now Camp Road was probably the track that ran through the length of the army camp, but back then it was like a gravel road, still quite wide, probably as wide as the road is now. The houses that have been built to the left were built on a wasteland, and that was just bricks, huge chunks of concrete, wire, and a couple of really deep holes. It was a place to keep away from. Even as kids we realised that it was probably very dangerous. That was probably buildings that either housed the anti-aircraft guns, or a place where they were worked on, or even possibly where ammunition was stored. And they'd all been demolished by the time we were kids in the 60s. So all the rubble from whatever it was just strewn around. But on the other side, where Jude Wine Close is, there was a row of white buildings, and I was told in an email that they were white prefabs made from wood. Now, I used to call for my friend there. He lived in one of those for a short while before he went to live in his new house in Penny Lane, and I never saw him again after that. But I remember knocking on his door, and it's quite possible that they were made from wood slats. Behind that, I think, was probably the road that Jude Wine is, or they were slightly in front of the houses that were built in the 50s and 60s at Jude Wine Close. And it ran all the way up to School Lane, and as I say, it sort of petered out from being a camp into a little bit of a wasteland where the housing estate is now. But when we walked up towards Woolton Wood, there were some trees on the right hand side where those retirement home type buildings are, and there was an old Victorian house in there that was pretty much derelict, and we used to play in there. It used to have a sign on saying "Keep out, danger," so of course that was an even bigger attraction, so we used to play in it when we were either coming up to the woods or coming home. And I've no idea what it is, and I've asked loads of people and they don't even remember it, so I'm beginning to think I might have dreamt this. So if you know what that house is, I would really like to hear from you, because I can't find it on a map or anything, but it was there in the 1960s and probably through to the 1970s when it was demolished and those flats were built for retirement home. And that is directly opposite the entrance to Woolton Wood. So if you do know about it, please get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. And thank you very much for watching, and we'll catch up soon.